We're looking at round-cornered gaming cards versus square-cornered sports cards, and I'm going to explain to you how to grade a round-cornered gaming card. So these round corners on gaming cards was purposely done. Obviously, these cards are being played in the game. So when you're playing the game, there's gonna be a lot of shuffling, there's gonna be a lot of dealing the cards out. So what happens is these corners can get really beat up. And if they were square cornered cards, they would just get damaged almost in the first time you play them. The round corners, preserve the card's integrity for a lot longer and help the cards remain, the same as they're going through the deck so they're not marked. So when it comes to grading a card with round corners, there's a lot of things you have to look out for. So the biggest thing is whether the card has been front cut or back cut. So explaining that basically is how the card was manufactured. So when these cards are made, they're made from a sheet and they're cut into strips and then cut into single cards, yet they all have square corners at this point. And then the corner cutting process happens in a bunch of different ways. So the traditional way was they would have about 1,000 cards in a stack and they'd press a die down through these cards and shear the corners off. So during that process, it's very important whether the cards face up or face down, because as that die comes through that stack of cards, it's actually going to roll the corners forward or backwards depending on the orientation of the card. So on this card, you can see very clearly that the corners kind of roll back towards you when you're looking at the back of the card. And with the very deep black ink on the back of a Magic card, you actually can create some kind of wear marks and visual cues, which actually kind of hinder the grade a little bit. Still, this is a manufacturing defect, so not a terrible defect on the card, but again, you can see the whitening quite more than if the card was front cut, like this Order of the Ebon Hand from Fallen Empires, where it rolls to the front, and then on the back it's exceptionally clean. When they're manufacturing cards, gaming cards in particular, these round corners can have a lot of defects straight from the factory. So we always tell you factory defects versus handling defects. So a factory defect on a corner is going to be probably a little white tick. So when the corner blades weren't quite sharp enough when they were cutting the corners of the card, you'll see a little tick of white on the top corner. Sometimes it wraps the whole corner, but most of the time, like on a Wizards of the Coast era card, like this Bulbasaur, you'll just see a little tip of white here on the corners, and that's completely normal from the card when it was manufactured. It will affect the grade, but obviously not as much as something like a big ding on the corner from someone dropping the card or hitting it with their finger. But these little touches of white are going to be very obvious, even from a card that's pulled right out of a pack. This card is a good example of a card that's taken a lot of handling defects because the corners are pretty white wrapped. So a white wrapped corner in gaming is basically a corner that shows white the entire radius of the corner. This card here, every corner has been affected. You have pretty significant wear coming into the card. This is obviously not a manufacturing defect. This card just got used a lot, whether it was carried around at school, whether it was being played in the game. It definitely has some affected corners here though. Like this one here has a pretty good little white tick here, definitely done outside the factory. My guess is this is because someone put the card inside of a box and hit that corner first and just bumped that corner. So you got to be careful when you look at these cards, because sometimes you're like, oh, maybe that's just manufacturing, but a lot of the times the handling defects will be much more pronounced than, say, a manufacturing defected corner. Like this one has a top left corner, looks like it's just manufacturing defect because it's right at the top center of the corner, whereas in the bottom here, it's kind of on the bottom right side of the corner, so that's more than likely a handling defect. Obviously, we're going to grade these a little bit differently. A handling defect is going to be graded a little bit more harshly than a manufacturing defect. So this card here, it still has nice corners overall. The top right and the bottom right are pretty clean, but again, that bottom left corner has a little bit of a bump. Along with the manufacturing defect at the top left, this is probably going to be right in that 8.5 range for corners. When these gaming cards are manufactured, the corners are actually cut in a bunch of different ways. In the beginning, like I mentioned, they just used a big guillotine and just chopped them all off at once. But in the future, sometimes they were cut by a milling machine, so they actually grind the corner off. And depending on how that machine was set, sometimes you can get like an oblong corner. So like this card right here has a corner that kind of steps down and goes into the card. It looks very odd when you look at it at first, but it's a very common trait with Wizards of the Coast cards. It's typically something that we don't really factor in the grade a ton, except for the very high parts of the grading scale. You can still get a gem mint card that has that small defect. Again, sometimes the ink won't even be disturbed at all with that little irregular corner. But again, it's something that is visible, it is a cue, so we will take it into consideration. Another common problem you'll see with Wizards of the Coast created Pokemon cards, especially in lower grades, is that the corner can separate a little bit. So you'll see the layers of the card come apart, and if you see that, it's a very bad thing for card grade. It's going to be affecting the condition quite drastically. So this card here, the War Leader's Helix, great card for Magic the Gathering, gain 4 life, do 4 damage, but unfortunately someone had dropped this card. So this corner right here, you can see a very pronounced ding in the corner where it just, when it fell, it just impacted that corner and all the way to the card, hit a hard surface, concrete, a hard table or whatever have you. And it actually caused the paper to crease a little bit, the corner's bent up. So that's going to be something that's going to greatly affect the corner grade. You have to be very careful looking for things like that. Sometimes it cannot, show any color loss, just a bend at all, but this one actually has some color loss and the bends there as well. So you got to be very careful looking at these corners. So, always look at all your cards and inspect the corners carefully because that's going to be one of the strongest things that affects the grade. It's a small area that can be damaged, therefore small damage is going to be a big impact on the grade. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for new episodes on CGC Cards Grade School.